And so I guess I was talking about right now in this period of coronavirus, I'm at home all the time. And because I'm at home all the time, I have much greater access to technology and the internet. And it's harder for me to stay away from them. And if it kind of reminds me of, like, even I think the description of first jhana is quite secluded from sense desires.
Okay.
And it's I feel like I have not been I've been having a very difficult time not being addicted to the technology.
You're using the word addiction. That's a pretty strong word.
I think it's fair to, I don't know, it has a strong pull.
They do have, let us say, two different qualities that you've mentioned, are two different possibilities of using the equipment mindfully or avoiding it. And doing both of those things has benefit. And therefore, it would be good to have both of those toys in your toy box.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you could say, all right, on Mondays, I'm going to do this one. On Tuesdays, I'm going to do that one. So that for a whole day, I'm mindfully using the computer, doing whatever, calling someone on Skype or all kinds of possibilities. But you do want to restrict it in the sense of wholesome versus unwholesome. And we've talked a bit about that already. The actual Pali word, by the way, is kusala and akusala. And I haven't used that. In fact, in several years, I haven't talked to anybody about this. So let me explain it to you like this. The history of the word kusala and akusala is that in India, there's a plant. I think it's here. It looks very much like lemongrass, except that it is even tougher leaves. The leaves on it are very, very strong, and each one of them is highly serrated so that it cuts. It's a protective mechanism. So in the time of the Buddha, because it was easy to do, they would cut that the leaf off at its base and then dry it out while it was under a board or something, so that it actually became a knife. And you could do things with it like slice bread or cut cloth and that kind of stuff. It wasn't good for sawing wood, but anything that was softer than that, it was really good at. So this is where the word comes from. So when we think of kusala, what that means is that we can now cut into it. And that akusala means that it's not worth cutting into, or that we can't cut into it because it's too hard. Okay, so but that has been come to understood to be wholesome and unwholesome, in the sense that our wholesome thoughts are the kind of wholesome thoughts that can cut into what's going on, so that we can take a look at it inside or insight. The way akusala means that whatever we're doing, we're not cutting into it for whatever reason, and therefore this is something that's not worth doing. So that would be now part of the criteria for what you're going to do when you're looking at stuff on the internet. Is this wholesome? Is this going to allow me to cut into things and get some insight? Or you could actually go so far as to put it into the context of Dhamma. Where is the Dhamma in this?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other one would be unwholesome stuff. And this is different for different people. in the sense that the things that we care about too much are the things that are going to be a kusala because it takes the night, or it and a good example of that would be in America, the politics right now, because there is so much hatred for Trump on one side and so much hatred towards the haters. And so things are really polarized. So that's possibly then a good thing to stay away from. Stay away from the news, stay away from politics. No, no need to follow how many people are dead and dying on the coronavirus, because that's possibly a kusala. But reading things about how to stay protected, what we need to do, stay in place, use the mask, that kind of stuff. That's kusala because it has some wholesome value to it. All right. So that's just an example, but I can give you tons of examples on that. But it's still up to you to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I already know that the majority of the use is definitely unwholesome. Yeah. And I've had very good days where the use of my technology is only wholesome, and both the amount of it I use is very little, and those days are very pleasant. Yeah. Last time we talked. Last time we talked, you had kind of said this thing about how the path has become about self-awareness. It was something like that.
Okay.
And I feel like that's been coming up a lot, where I'm just gaining a lot of self-awareness about myself, and kind of where what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And sometimes I feel like I've had lots of like memories of childhood stuff come up, and I kind of feel like a traumatized, like immature child, and now I'm just realizing, oh wow, all of this stuff happened to me, and I can tell I'm working on it and improving it, but sometimes it also feels like just a little bit like daunting.
Okay. Thank you for that question. There's a couple of things to say about it. First off, to say is that every kid in our culture gets traumatized in one way or the other, even if he's a really wealthy kid who is pampered. In fact, those kids are traumatized in the way that they wind up traumatizing everybody around them all the time. They become dictators and Napoleons and Donald Trumps and that kind of stuff. So everyone is traumatized by our past, and that both the trauma itself and the child's response to the input that he's getting, that he's feeling traumatized about it, the combination of those things is what builds personality, and it gets built up over time. Okay, it gets headed in a particular direction, and then sometimes it wiggles and wobbles around, and then something big will happen, and that kind of fixes it going in a certain direction, and then everything continues to roll along in that way. Psychologists call this personality. And most people think that they are their personality because it's kind of persistent, and we kind of think of ourselves as persistent. However, you can also see all of that childhood stuff that we were building up and more, in the sense of back to the old original programming that was built into the DNA that goes back into our ancestry. So that a lot of our behavior was founded upon and started happening hundreds or thousands of years ago. In that regard, you could almost call it our original sin, is because of the sins that we have inherited from our forefathers and mothers. And that one of the most basic things then that we do inherit from them is called the self-preservation instinct. Because humans without a self-preservation instinct generally get bumped off pretty quickly. Cowboys with too much bravado, not using their head, not doing things wisely, saying, I can do anything, will get killed fairly quickly. So what is it that keeps us from getting killed on a regular basis? Because most people don't. The answer is fear. So fear has actually been what's keeping us alive, but it's also being used and manipulated by the political parties and everything else so that we become almost like an animal with a rope in the nose. They have a ring in the nose and then they put a rope on that ring and the cow will go anywhere because it feels like it could not lose that part of their nose. Well, in fact, yeah, if a big bull wants to get away, he'll just go like that and pull that rope right off. And he's willing to have the sting because he'd rather have his freedom. So that's in a way of what we're going to start doing here is looking at that old personality is being driven around or we're being pulled around, and that the rope itself is the society that we live in, which is the laptop. Okay? That's got kind of a rope on us. And so, in fact, that's why we use the word attachment, is because we could free ourselves, but we don't. Because our personality has called for it, and that to do otherwise can be actually dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so there's some cost possibly involved.
Yeah, I've been noticing that with the memories that come up about my childhood. Often there's a clear link between a particular memory and part of my behavior or personality. Um, and also, I think it is becoming very clear to me the attachment to the computer is, like, without a doubt, the biggest attachment I have. And it's something that developed, when I was maybe in my early teens.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's kind of deep, but yeah, it's good that I feel like I know what's the biggest demon, so to speak.
I didn't catch that last.
It's I feel like now I know what's the biggest demon or the biggest kind of thing that I need to overcome.
Okay, well, let's go then in this direction. Every time that you see that or anything like it, this is when you see it, that means that Sati has just occurred. You've just woken up. Most of the time, and you know this, that it's happening, but you're not seeing it. Now you're beginning to wake up, so now you're beginning to see this stuff. Okay, and that every time that you do see it, never mind the times that we don't, because we're going to develop a skill so that we see it more and more often. And so as you see it, then we go through the typical anapanasati cycle with it in the sense of, aha, I see you.
Mm-hmm.
And that aha, I see you separates us from it. Now you are no longer your old personality. Now you're the frontal cortex of the mind. And I'm using it only in the sense of language. Actually, the frontal cortex has no self in it. But it's now the boss. Aha, I see you separates us from that old past that is based in the reptilian brain, and all of our memory systems, by the way, is in the cerebellum, which, guess what? Right back there on the humans have a huge cerebellum because we can remember all kinds of stuff. But it's always based in a primitive sort of situation. So most people don't actually know that they live their lives instinctually. They don't know that they're not using the best part of their mind. That in fact, the less educated, that's one of the good qualities of education is many aspects of things that you learn in education require that frontal cortex. But very few times do we say, okay, instead of I'm going to put that frontal cortex on algebra, or I'm going to put it on the tuba, or I'm going to put it on the violin. Now instead I'm going to put it on this thing here. And so we're waking up, but by doing it that way, that means that now there is an observer and an observed, to where before there was only the observed because the observer was asleep. It's sort of like the difference in the woods about the birds, depending upon whether there's a bird watcher in the woods or not. That's something that it took them a long time to figure out, that the birds know more about the bird watcher than the bird watcher knows about the birds. And so the only thing that the bird watcher sees is birds who know about a bird watcher. And what he came to see was birds who act naturally without a bird watcher. And he can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we wake this part of the brain up, this frontal cortex, so that we can see what the personality that's being driven by the past is doing, then we're drawing and beginning to open things up. Back to the word kusala, we're now making a cut in there, and we're saying, "Oh, I've got this thing, and I've got that thing," and so looking at it like that, and so aha, I see you is actually the actual waking up, the first instant of wake up, and then aha, I see you is almost the growth, to the point that now it's the boss. Now that the mind is woken up. This is step 9 of Anapanasati. We can now, through that gladdening of the mind and growing and stretching it, brightening it, it becomes more powerful than that hindrance. And so now this is what's on the mind.
So I've noticed that if I use the computer a little bit and then I notice I'm slipping into unwholesome activity, and then I have the sati, I can pull myself out. But if I don't have the sati in that moment, and I keep going and I keep going and I get really deep, I get this kind of fake, like this sati without effort and without attitude. It's like I kind of for a moment realize I've gone very deep, but it's like I'm in this kind of victim, I can't do it mentality. This is too big of a, I'm too deep now.
Okay, I understand exactly what you're saying, because now we have to start looking at it from the sense of one's right effort. And in this case, as is all cases, the first thing you would do after I see you. Because in fact, what's happening is we see it, but then we don't do anything about it. We don't take any effort at all. Some people would call this a meditation of choiceless awareness. Others would, this actually happens to all students. And it's well known in the Goenka retreat that on day 1, the student's mind will wander away 4, 5, 6 times an hour. But by day 6 is wandering away 30, 40, 50 times. What's going on? The answer is that, it was on day 1, it was probably just wandering all over the place, but Sati was so slow that you only managed to catch it 6 or 7 times. But by day 6, Sati being developed more and more, we can catch the mind wandering away much more often. Okay, so that basically that development of the Sati is what we're working with. But we also want to incorporate as a skill right effort. Because what those students in the beginning would do at the Goenka retreat, and then really started to doing it on day 6, not having right effort, is that the instruction is never mind when you catch it wandering away, start again, come back to the breath. But they don't come back to the breath. What do? They start having thoughts about, oh, this is a monkey mind, oh, meditation is so difficult, oh, my legs hurt, why am I here? All of those doubts and stuff comes up, which means they're just right back into hindrance. And they didn't take the effort to take that deep breath. Because once you've taken that deep breath, now you're kind of committed to finishing that cycle of becoming or coming to a state of satisfaction. And if the laptop itself is part of the issue, then closing the lid of that laptop with that deep breath so that right now I can be free of that laptop. Wow. Wakey, wakey, wakey. You know, time to wake up. Oh, I'm glad I don't have to look at that picture anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very empowering when I do it. It's like, oh yeah, I can totally just stop. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that will give you a satisfaction in the point that I am in fact in charge. That I am not sucked all the way down into it. Because that's actually, when you say it like that, that's playing victim. But you're the lion.
Yeah.
You're capable of doing this. You've got the that point about no matter how much obstruction the mind gets, you can pull it out. So even from the bottom of that hole that you get to, when you recognize that there you are, with Sati, now's the time for taking that deep breath, shutting the lid of the computer, and with the thought, I saw that, I got it. This is not wholesome. Then you, with that deep breath, and I see you, then we can become, if you want to use the word, it would be a good way to use the word, and that is proud. You feel good that you were able to accomplish that. And that's the reward. That's the pleasure that you're taking. The pleasure now is not of getting something from the outside. The pleasure comes from the fact that you can do this.
Yeah.
That's the success part of the satisfaction. You can, in fact, close the lid of that computer and take a deep breath. And know that you can do that anytime. It doesn't matter what kind of image is on that screen. If you're going off in the wrong direction, you can change that image. And if you keep changing it to the wrong images over and over again, it's just, let's shut this thing down for a moment. Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
And have a little anapanasati moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can bring yourself to a state of satisfaction. Once you get back into the state of satisfaction, this is how you would do the PC mindfully, by the way, is once you get that satisfaction back again, now you're going to open the computer back up and find something else to do.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, I'll do it. I've been noticing. I've been like thinking about trust a lot and safety and feeling safe. I've been noticing how much my thoughts are planning what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do, and I'm starting to realize that I can not plan, and when I get to that situation, I will be able to do what I need to do without having said my whole conversation in my head first before asking the person the question.
There's a
That's been,
balance in there someplace. One
yeah,
is to know what you're going to say and know your information quite well. And then there's the quality of rehearsing it. Because people who are rehearsing it over and over and over again are doing so because they're insecure. They're not sure that they're going to be able to say what they want to say. But the going into the conversation completely unprepared may or may not be a good thing to do, depending upon whether we're ill prepared and we don't know what to do, or that we're not prepared, but we can still do what needs to be done. Okay.
yeah. And as far as I can tell, my mind is doing so much planning. It's almost impossible for me to be completely unprepared. So even if I'm constantly recognizing and releasing those thoughts, by the time the situation comes up, I've still done a good amount of planning, so I'm prepared.
Well, that's really great because you got what needed to be done, but you didn't spend all your time in rehearsal. You spent your time in watching yourself do the planning. That's good. That's exactly the direction that we're going to go in. And again, it has to do with deep breath. So make sure that you start incorporating your deep breath whenever that kind of stuff also happens, that you recognize, oh, I'm rehearsing now too much, or whatever way that you were expressing it. Then,
yeah, I've actually been emphasizing the deep breath since the last time we spoke. And I've been emphasizing deep breath, and I've also been emphasizing like a wide, full body awareness. So if I'm breathing, I'm not focusing on the stomach or the nose, which is what I am used to. I'm just breathing in the whole body, and kind of playing around with pushing that awareness out, because it wants to collapse. So both of those, both the deep breaths and then pushing the awareness out, has been helpful.
Sounds
also,
good.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Also, I've been having a lot of thoughts about like self-acceptance, and it's kind of what you said about not worrying about the case when you don't have sati. And in some sense, you can only really act when you have the sati. If you don't have the sati, you can't.
Then
do
you're
anything.
back to ordinary. Now you're back into ordinary mind, and that ordinary mind is going to have then those kind of feelings of I'm not good enough, my sati's not good enough, I'm going to wind up being a failure at this. Okay, that's part of your personality. So the part of the sati is to wake up to that you are not the personality that's been built up over time.
Yeah, and
You have
I've
a
even
choice about that.
yeah, I've even been looking back at memories, and I used to look at those memories and think, "Oh, I wish I could have done better," or "Man, if only I'd done better, things would be better now." But now I've been kind of looking at it like, "Oh, you know what? I just didn't have the sati back then. There's nothing I could have done. So I'm not going to beat myself up about it. There's
That's so excellent. I'm really pleased because that's something that when students begin to gain sati, they begin to change the personality. And that a way of saying it is that we begin to get higher standards because we are not that old personality. Then when we delve into that and think about it, that's not you. That was another person, an older personality was doing that. And that so the best thing to do is to stay out of the past, just allow that old memory system to be there, but that when we reminisce about it, you're wound up going to feel bad. This is something I wish that I could teach people in general, that is so valuable to stay out of the personality that we're trying to abandon anyway. And so whenever thoughts about your childhood come up, you can say, never mind. A way of thinking about it, you've heard about the thing that it happens in soldiers during war. They've had a number of names for it. They called it shell shock. And
PTSD.
now they're calling it PTSD, which is the trauma that soldiers go through, lingers on. So whenever they think about it, or sometimes reacting, an example of that is the guy who's gotten home. He's been home. He's really happy to be there with his family. It's been about a month or two, and then his son comes in and jumps on him to wake him up in the morning, and the kid gets strangled. Why? Because his dad was going back to whatever it was that was in his war memory, and he reacted out of the fear of the instinct, using the skills of the body that he had learned in the military, but it was completely inappropriate for him to do that. The frontal cortex was not operating when he was waking up. Okay, so that's a really best example of it. But those who have PTSD will have startle or reactionary things as if the world is still very dangerous. Well, it actually was when they were in the war zone. It was dangerous. So we somehow need to turn that dangerous stuff off. And that's what mostly PTSD is about. Because I've actually been around and worked with guys who are like that. But, and I'm going to use this but really clear, in the sense that all of us, every one of us, has childhood traumas that built up the personality the same way that this young adult got stuff built up while he was in action, so that it was an automatic response to it in the present when it was totally inappropriate. I would go so far in the sense of calling it a new disease, and that would be, instead of PTSD, it would be PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder. Because we've all got it, okay? And possibly a really excellent way of talking about this is that the noble mind is actually nothing more than a human mind that's fully human, where we grow out of our childhood completely, so that the childhood and the things that we learned as a child are no longer there. That we put away the childish things, and I'm not talking about toys, I'm talking about all of our belief systems, all in fact of our personality.
Yeah.
And we can do that. That's the thing. People will say when they hear that, they say, oh no, what a big job that is. Well, it's not a big job. In fact, it's merely the flip of the switch. The fact is, you keep having to flip that switch often, but it's your choice. Wake up. Come in and practice Anapanasati. Take that deep breath and come out of that childhood right this very minute, right this very moment or second is a way of saying it. And so we practice this over and over and over again. This part of the Eightfold Noble Path of, first off, we have the intention to do that. That's one's right view. We've got the view that I'm going to come out of this stuff. And then we say, okay, I'm going to be on guard. I'm going to start remembering and remembering and remembering. And when it happens, as soon as I remember, I'm going to take the effort that it takes, which requires also a deep breath and an aha, I see you. And this is the wake-up call. And so we wake up, and we're no longer now in that personality. And that's all there is to it. We just have to do that, what, 1 million times, 2 million, 5 million? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a large number, and we keep doing it over and over and over again. And so we can use all kinds of items. You can use the laptop as a tool for Sati to wake up. And the way to do it in this sense is what I'm looking at wholesome or is it not wholesome? And
Yeah, I remember as a kid, the laptop was actually a source of security because I had moved from India to the U.S. and my parents came from an Indian background, and so I had a lot of questions that they didn't have answers to. And I would go on the internet and I would find acceptable answers. You know, they weren't the best answers, but I would find acceptable answers for these questions about American culture and things like that. And so early on, I developed almost an attachment, essentially, because back then, it was a source of security and safety, and it was useful and necessary for me.
Okay. Well, that has a value then, because in fact, what we are now intentionally developing through Anapanasati is that sense of security.
Exactly.
That very sense of security that you got from the laptop, you now recognize that it's not the laptop that gives you security. That that's something you're able to do with your own mind. Once you see that, you can recognize, oh, I don't need the laptop for that security. I know how to manipulate it directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have this cat. I don't know if you can see. He's
I
you might
see
not be able.
boxes and a backpack and a blue satchel. Oh, a cat.
Exactly. And I've been learning a lot about this the PCSD from him, just because he was very anxious and very afraid when we first got him, and I had to like physically pick him up and put him on my lap and pet him so he knew I was safe and trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that over and over and over, and eventually he started coming to me on his own and it's very fun to watch him open up and become more and more comfortable, and then finally you see him just kind of laying on the floor completely vulnerable, just no fear. And it's
Yes.
really, it's nice to see.
Now, here's another way of looking at it: is that if in fact this post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome or post-childhood traumatic syndrome, you could say also, well, the cat had that too. And so we could almost go to the point of calling it wild.
Mm-hmm.
And so wild would then be post-traumatic stress disorder. And part then of what needs to be done is domestication. What you've done is you've taken a wild cat that may have been partially domesticated from the beginning, but it certainly had a lot of wildness in it. And so now you're domesticating it. This domestication of animals, in the time of the Buddha, they used the word Nibbana.
Really?
Yes, you have Nibbana to the cat.
Huh. That's
The
so
cat
cool.
is now Nibbana. And another way of using the word Nibbana in the old days was cooling off. Like after a fire is put out, it's cool. After food is taken out of the oven, or for modern times, out of the microwave. When you take food out of the microwave, sometimes it's really too hot to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to let it cool a bit. Or food that's coming right out of the fire has to cool, but we still want it warm. We like it. It's delicious when it's warm, but we don't want it when it's hot, too hot. A
Yeah.
different. Here's a way of thinking about it: is that when you get a really hot cup of coffee, the only thing you can do is blow and sip. But after it cools off in just a minute or so, now you can gulp it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really when you like it, is when you can really.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that sweet spot where it's as hot as it can be, but you can still take it down.
Yes. Okay. So this is a way of then looking at the process of Nibbana so that we can begin to understand what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was saying when he says little Nibbanas. In fact, we all have those throughout the day, that people would in fact have aneurysms, they would have heart attacks, they would clutch themselves to death, all kinds of possibilities because we are so habit driven and so instinctual that it's a surprise that people are able to survive anyway in this modern society. But the way that we have learned to handle it is by having little unintentional nibbana moments. I've actually seen it in movies now that I know what I'm looking for. When the guy sits down in a chair and goes, and that happens so many times. I mean, right after the adventure, just right after you kill the snake or whatever it was in the movie, and you, that's over. That's what we mean by the cooling off or the letting it go. That's the Nibbana. And so this is also part of how we're practicing with that long, deep out breath of Anapanasati, taking the air in, getting the oxygen in, but that out breath, that exhaust, is the letting go, the relinquishment, or the release. And that release then can also be the release of our grasping and clinging. Not permanently, but right now we can do it. And so we let go over and over and over again like that with that exhaustive out breath. And so we play this little song of seeing it, getting up the effort to take a really good deep in breath, wake the mind up by saying, I see you, getting into a state of satisfaction in the sense, I can do this. I know how to do this. And then that exhaustive out breath, is the letting go, the release. And so that's a way of describing what we're doing. If you practice that kind of in that way, in that order, every time you remember, then it will start to build a little Dhammara moment over and over and over again so that you actually really just let it go, cool off, so that you become like your cat. Your cat's cooled down now. It's not on guard. So that's that point then. That on guard is the wildness in every one of us because we seek danger when there is no danger there. And so we train ourselves out of it every time by flipping that switch from being in the personality that's afraid into practicing getting into a state of satisfaction, developing a new personality.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this in terms of trust a lot and just trusting things are going to be okay. Things are going to work out. Things are okay.
They've already worked out.
Yeah.
Here we are.
That's true. That's true. Oh, yeah. So.
This is it.
Yeah.
That's an important way to look at it. This is it. Things did work out.
In fact, I did a guided meditation the other day, and at some point, the meditation speaker said something along those terms. You're not waiting for anything to happen. You don't need to change into becoming anything. You're already there. You did it. Just relax. That's it. And that was that clicked in that moment, and it was
excellent.
Really nice.
Excellent. Yes, exactly so. that in fact, in many of the traditions, they talk about it when they say, I want to be enlightened. The answer is you're already enlightened. You're
Yes.
already there.
Yeah, which is unhelpful if your habits of mind are just very, uh, very, causing samsaric there.
Yes. So in fact, that statement has to be said at the right time.
Hmm.
Okay. And for that meditation, guided meditation for you, that was the right time. Most people, it just doesn't mean anything to them. They just
Yeah.
immediately strike it off and say, no, I'm not. But other people say, you're damn right I am. Let me go
Yeah.
do what Buddhists do. Let me go rob a bank or something, And and so that kind of point, in fact, is dangerous. If people hear the Dhamma at the wrong time, it will throw them into wrong view
Mm.
with kind of the thought, oh yeah, then I can get away with anything. And that means that now they've gained the freedom to, when in fact we're working about getting the freedom
Freedom
from.
from. Hmm.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so
Heard that
their
before.
freedom to go out and do what they want to do, regardless of the harm that they do with it, to where freedom from is becoming free from the tendencies to go out and harm others. And so it,
Yeah.
it can be dangerous when you tell somebody he's already enlightened,
Yeah.
because he will
And
harm people.
the other thing that in that guided meditation that the teacher said was, um, like the whole sit, I had been noticing the hindrance. Aha, I see you, letting it go, returning to a state of relaxation. And he said, notice how this process is now just doing itself. And so I could almost kind of let go and just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna, I don't have to worry that I'm not gonna do it next time. I've been doing it every time I've done it. It's gonna. So that was really, really nice.
That's really excellent. That's what you're talking about now is actually the first knowledge or the first step on the noble path. And that first knowledge, the first step on the noble path, then the noble path of, you see, the Sotapan, it has both path and fruit. The later part of Sotapan is the fruit or the result or the benefit of having walked the path. But getting on the path, the first step on that path is when one knows that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, that he can clean it out and come back to the here now.
Yeah.
That knowledge, the Buddha says, is supramundane. It is noble. It is a factor of the path, and it's not had by ordinary people. This is the first step on the path that takes us out of being an ordinary person. An ordinary person will continue to think, um, well, this is just who I am, or I need a savior, or if I only had a good psychologist, or anything like that, we're looking for it on the outside. But now, or in your case, oh, the laptop gives security. No, it's not the laptop
Hmm.
that gives
Yeah.
security. And
It's
okay,
here.
so but what gives security in the laptop is that the thought behind it is I can get what I need from looking online with the laptop.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
it's very information based, and I think again it relates to me having questions and wanting answers, and so it leads to this mindset where I'm trying to get all of the pieces of information to do anything before I actually act. Because if I don't have everything planned out perfectly, it's not going to go right.
Ah,
And I'm realizing I'm
right.
realizing that I don't need to do it. I have already too much information. I can just start doing.
Okay. That uh there's the concept of the Dhamma being delivered in chunks or pieces that fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And it is up to the students to put the puzzle together. And so there is that side of the analogy. But the analogy that you're talking about is the analogy about perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than understanding,
Yeah.
there is the fear that if I don't get it perfect, it'll all fall apart.
It's a desire for like omniscience.
Mm-hmm. That, by the way, is a human trait. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't, in fact, be human. If you ran across a chimpanzee who really wanted to know about that, you would have a human on your hands.
Mm.
That's what the frontal cortex is all about. Is you can call it this: connect the dots. Another one would be figuring it out, or understanding what is being seen. And so we can go to various depths of that. And so that part that you're telling me about, that's not only been a survival mechanism, that's gotten you great, great benefits. And so I would say to keep that investigative quality open. All right. The thing that we have to look at is not the gathering of more information, but rather how do we feel when we're gathering that information? Because if I'm looking for perfection, then I'll never get perfect.
Yeah.
But I can really enjoy continuing to take in information. I really like it. I like to hear what the students have to say. I really like to find out things on the internet to in a way, kind of track how things are heading. And so there is great benefit in having good information. For instance, people who don't have information about the corona-19 virus are subject to catching it. That's why it was spreading. It's because nobody knew anything about it. But now we have people who know all about it and still won't change their behavior because of one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with when the government puts enough coercion to shut things down so that we can stay isolated, now that you know what to do, there's no reason to continue to be afraid of corona-19. We've heard it, we've done what we needed to do, and now we're finished. So let's settle down and be at peace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But most folks are not like that. In fact, the anxiety of the corona-19 has settled now into what we're calling cabin fever. Okay,
Yep.
first it was absolute panic about am I going to catch corona-19, but now the same feeling has the thought of let me out of here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really just that anxiety, and people are not paying attention to that. If you begin to see that stuff within, what do? Same thing. I see you, anxiety. Let me take a deep breath. Let me breathe into that anxiety, take a good close look at it, knowing that it doesn't matter how much anxiety there's going to be there or what label I put on it, I can handle it. That's that first knowledge. I can do this. I'm capable of doing this.
Yeah.
I know I can do it. I'm gaining the skill.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. I'm really pleased with your progress. Continue on. So I've given you quite a number of little things to work with. And so
Absolutely.
I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, Aman.